Hi, everyone. It's noon, so we are going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us for today's Spring into Health event. My name's Haven Spanier, and I'm the Senior Director of Programming at the University of South Carolina's Alumni Association. And it's my pleasure to get to introduce our host today. But a few reminders before we get started. First of all, Dr. Brown wants to hear all of your questions today and to make the event as interactive as possible. So please, if you have any questions throughout the event today, type those into the chat. And if you aren't super familiar with Zoom, there's a control panel across the bottom of your screen. There's a chat button in there, and it should pull up for you to type in your questions. I also want to thank Prisma Health for making today's event possible. But without further ado, I'd love to introduce to you Dr. Brown. Dr. Rachel Brown received her medical degree from Boston University School of Medicine and completed her residency in family medicine at the Palmetto Health Alliance in Columbia. Dr. Brown is board certified by the American Board of Family Medicine. She currently serves as the medical director of prevention and wellness for Prisma Health. So thank you so much, Dr. Brown, for joining us today. I am really looking forward to this conversation.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Haven, so much for having me. Before I dive into the content, I really wanted to pose a question to everybody out there, and I wish I could see you. This is the kind of thing that I've been doing for a long time, and I really love to do it in person and engage with folks, but we'll do the best we can. But here's the question I have for you. If you have ever, in your job, in your current career, thought to yourself, that is it, I'm done, I can't do this anymore, I'm fried, then this talk is for you. Now, if you have ever in the last year, let's say, thought to yourself, that's it, I'm done, I'm fried, I can't do this COVID thing anymore, I can't do this political tumult anymore, I can't tolerate what is going on in our world anymore, then this talk is for you. But even if you're someone who is doing well, okay, maybe you were able to take charge of a lifestyle change that you were interested in making. Maybe you've spent more time with friends and family than you have in the past, or connected with them. Maybe the change was good for you. This talk is also for you, because we're going to be talking about managing stress, but more importantly, building resilience. And no matter what's going on in our world, stress is always going to be a part of it. It just so happens that it's been a huge part of it over the last year and a half or so. So this talk may be more timely, but it certainly doesn't mean this is the only time where this is an important topic. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that you all can see what I have to share with you. But I am going to keep the chat box open, because I want to be able to see what questions you have. So before I get started, let me open that up. Make sure we can see it over here in the corner. Okay. And this is the kind of thing, it's not letting me see it. Goodness gracious. So what I may have to have you do, Haven, is if questions pop up, just unmute and interrupt me. Because the chat box is not popping up like it was before. I'm not sure why. But this is the kind of talk that if I had been doing with you all in person, I would be asking you lots of questions, trying to engage as much as possible. So it's much more fun that way than just sort of spitting out this information to you. So please type your questions in the chat box, or unmute and stop me, preferably. But Haven, let me know if anything pops up. So we're going to talk about stress, but we're going to talk about it in terms of, from a medical point of view, which is how I see stress. And it's important for you to understand that we call stress the things that stress us out, but stress for the body is really a physiologic reaction. It's a physiologic reaction to those threats or conditions that we call stress. So it can be good or bad. So for instance, if you're driving into work or driving home and someone swerves in front of you, that stress causes your body to react, you slam on the brakes, right? We need that. We need that kind of stress in our lives. I coach folks all the time that a little bit of stress, a little bit of nerves and anxiety before an exam, before a big game, before a performance, before a big meeting, before a big presentation, that actually helps us to perform a little bit better. So all stress is not all bad. We tend to use that term to mean all of the things that are overwhelming us in our lives. But I want you to think more about stress being a physiologic response. Our body dumping a whole host of chemicals and hormones into our body to cause our heart and our lungs and our gut and our muscles and our brain to do a specific set of functions. And the reason we're going to think about it that way is going to be important when we talk about how to manage that stress reaction. But I do want to bring up that stress is a little bit different than burnout, or I should say burnout is a very specific consequence of stressors in the workplace. So burnout is a syndrome, and it has three sort of basic characteristics that go along with it. And that's emotional exhaustion, just being completely fried after your period of time at work or your shift. Depersonalization, which means suddenly everything is a task. You're really not humanizing your work. And then diminished feelings of personal accomplishment. So that sense that no matter how hard you try, you're really not making a difference. And by the way, that might not necessarily be true. It's just your perception when you're in that state of burnout. Folks who are burnout at work have an inability, especially crisis burnout, have an inability to experience positive emotions. And that's going to be important when we talk about what positive emotions can do for us. But I want to point out here that the WHO actually added burnout as a diagnosis, but you can see here it's career related. It's related to your job. So there may be things in your personal life that cause stress. That's not burnout. It's when you are feeling this emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and diminished feelings of accomplishment at work that you can call the outcome of all those stressors burnout. So just so you know a little bit about the vernacular that's out there. So one of the things I share with folks is just how burnout or stressed out do people feel. And I have updated this information since March of 2020. You can imagine 2020, excuse me. You can imagine that the numbers look very different than they did this time, say 2 years ago in March 2019. And so just one example is a Gallup poll that was done last November. And it revealed 67%, basically 2/3 of people feel burnout by their job. So when you look at this information in healthcare, it's much higher, but really across the board, people are feeling burnt out. And the likelihood here is that because they haven't had the balance in their personal lives or in our outside of work lives, to offset some of the stressors that we've had thanks to COVID and other things that have happened all year long. And so we see many, many, many people wanting to quit their jobs. Stress and burnout can cause physical symptoms. And so we see a 0.25% increase in the likelihood of someone to visit the emergency room, even higher than that, the likelihood of people visiting their personal doctors because they're having a physical symptom. 2/3 of folks are taking more sick days. And some of them are doing that because they're having physical symptoms, and others are doing it because they're just flat out worn out because of their emotional well-being being at risk. And 2.6 times more likely to be looking for another job, which actually correlates perfectly to this. So if you have basically 500% more folks wanting to do something different, that's very tumultuous in the workforce. And can also bleed over into personal life. And the reverse happens as well. So I don't think I need to talk more about that. I think most people get, yeah, this is a super, super stressful time for people. Everyone's feeling it. Even the most resilient of us is struggling with our emotional well-being because we've just had so much on our plate in the last 12 months. So let's go back for a second. Now that we know the context, we know that people are stressed out, we know that people are suffering. Let's talk about that physiologic response again. Now, I'm not going to go through this slide in any kind of detail, but it's important for you to see that when I was in medical school, this is part of what they taught us about the stress response. Those stressors that we talked about, those threats, those conditions, coupled with whatever coping strategies we have, and this is what I want to help you build, will release cortisol. And most folks at this point have heard that cortisol is the main stress hormone. There are several stress hormones, but this is the main one. And all I want you to note here is that when that cortisol is released into our bodies, it impacts virtually every organ and every system, physiologic system in our bodies. Okay. So everything stands to attention when that cortisol is released. And that's okay until it's constant, until there's cortisol being released all the time. The other thing I want to show you is that that stress response is driven by numerous things. Okay. Some we cannot control, right? So you may have noticed that some of us in this world tend to stress out more easily. And some of us in this world tend to be cool as a cucumber more easily. And that's our genetics. How are we predisposed in terms of coping with stress? How are we predisposed to act? And there's a fun little study out there that has shown that if you are someone who was fairly histrionic in high school, this might have been me, where maybe everything was very dramatic, puberty was tough, there were always relationship issues and, just lots of drama and emotion. You are one of those people who's genetically hardwired to maybe be more susceptible to stressors. The folks that you can think back of in high school who were just calm, seemed to take everything in stride, they're the ones that tend to be genetically predisposed to not having as strong a reaction to stress. However, what that study also shows is even those people who are predisposed to not responding as strongly to a stressor can lose that ability. Okay. And if anything can do that, it's our world right now. It can kind of whip the resilience out of you. But there is a component of this that's not really under our control. It's more what we are sort of born with. The other thing is the life experiences. And before this year, this was not one that was, tough for folks to imagine. They really understood that, but it makes a whole lot of sense this year. And then there's rumination. So if you're predisposed to having a strong reaction to stress, then we live in a world that's providing plenty of stressors. Rumination on top of that will elevate the impact of that cortisol. So in other words, if I have a stressful event and I tell somebody about it, it actually increases my stress hormone. It dumps more cortisol into my system. And it's as if that stressor is happening again. What I tell folks, and here's your first tip, is to follow the rule of 3. And that is, if something stressful happens to you, tell 3 friends, 3 support folks, whoever, and then let it go. There is a bit of a calming effect in venting around stressful experiences and sharing them with someone who's listening empathetically to you. But after 3 times, that calming effect goes away. And so you really only get that bang for your buck the first 3 times you tell someone about it. After that, all you're doing is, again, increasing that stress response, increasing that cortisol. So keep it to 3 times if you can. And you'll find that balance is much better, and you're not continually exposing your body, the physiology to that cortisol. Now, again, as I mentioned, cortisol is a good thing. We need it. We need that to happen when we need our stress response to protect us or to help us cope or help us to adapt. However, when that cortisol response becomes chronic, in other words, we're always feeling like we're stressed out, that's when the problems occur. Somebody raised their hand, so I would love you to unmute yourself if you're able. Haven, I don't know if our participants are able to unmute.
They're not able,
okay.
But if you have questions, if you'll type those into the chat, I can read those out to Dr. Brown.
Yeah, so Haven, just stop me when you get the question and I'd love to answer it. So we're going to move to talking about chronic stress and why we work so hard in my industry to help folks change their coping strategies and build resilience so that they do not have that chronic cortisol exposure. So acute stress here, you guys have probably noted all of these symptoms. Maybe you're nervous about a big presentation. Maybe you're singing at church and you're nervous. Some of these symptoms you probably experienced. Okay, that's to be expected. And again, some of these can be helpful, elevated blood pressure and heart rate, for instance, if we need to run away from a threat. However, this is what happens when you're exposed to chronic stress. And you can see, again, not going to go through every one of these, but you can see essentially every body system is impacted. Okay, our endocrine system, our nervous system, our gut, our lungs, our cardiovascular system, even our emotional and mental wellness. And it can also cause cancer. We know that cancer is exacerbated by stress and premature aging and premature death. So none of these are great, right? We tend to think of these things as consequences that happen to other people, but even young people, even in grade school who I work with, need to begin thinking about preventing this, because it all starts when we're young and we have that chronic exposure to stress. And sadly, we are seeing people in their 30s and 40s who are suffering from some of the things on this list, in part due to that chronic stress. Haven, do we have a question?
We do not yet.
Not yet. Okay, gotcha. Great. So if you get anything out of this talk today, it is an understanding that managing your stress, developing coping strategies, building resilience, and taking care of yourself is paramount to being able to do everything else it is you want to do. It is not selfish. It is not a selfish choice. It actually is an unselfish choice. You are choosing to make sure that you are well enough to be able to do what it is you need to do, whether that's in your job, taking care of children, taking care of parents, whatever you need to do, you need to be making sure that you prioritize rest and self-care. Because when you take the time to replenish your spirit, it allows you to serve others from the overflow, because you just can't serve from an empty vessel. We hear this over and over and over again, but until we take it to heart and really understand what it means to make sure that we feel as whole as possible so that we can serve others and do what it is that we're supposed to be doing each day, it's really just kind of lip service. It's not as easy as just resting and relaxing, right? We've got to make sure we really integrate it into our lifestyle. So let me give you some tips on how to do that. The first thing we're going to talk about are tips that will help you in the moment when you are experiencing a great amount of stress. Okay, so this is kind of how we've felt the stressor. We're having that cortisol dump. We're having those symptoms. We want to kind of stop the cycle. What are some things we can do in that moment to lower that cortisol level? And everybody hates this one because no one wants this to be the right answer, but physical activity is the number one way of stopping that cortisol cycle. Okay, it interrupts it at the brain level, and that cortisol stops being released. Now, this does not mean you have to run off and work out for an hour at the local gym. This can mean getting up and taking a walk around. This could mean doing push-ups on your desk. It could mean doing squats. It does not have to be a workout. It's simply physical activity, okay? Stretching and massage not only give you that physical activity component, and so you again interrupt the signal at the brain and cortisol stops being released, but stretching and massage, even self-massage, so if you were to reach over and kind of give your shoulders a squeeze, releases serotonin, which you may have heard is our happy hormone. It's one of our hormones that makes us feel good. And so you've stopped the cortisol, but you're also releasing a hormone that makes us feel better. So stretching is a wonderful way to manage stress in the moment. Humor and music as well. And I should tell you that everything I present to you is evidence-based. Okay, this is not anything I just made up in my little head. This all has data behind it to show that it actually will stop that cortisol release. So if you can find someone who makes you laugh or pull up your favorite, cat fail memes, whatever it is that gets you giggling or feeling amusement, that's also going to stop the cortisol release. And music does to an extent as well. And what's interesting is it's the music that you like. So you don't necessarily have to choose something soothing. If you prefer kind of that headbanging music, that's what you love. That's what's going to stop the cortisol release for you. Focusing outward and doing a random act of kindness for someone is another way to stop the cortisol dump. Okay. It has to be genuine. If you say to yourself, oh my gosh, I need to not be stressed out, I'm just going to go hand someone a $1 bill so they can get something out of the vending machine. I don't know that there's really a lot of feeling behind that. So it has to be somewhat genuine, and it has to be random. So for those of you who are in careers that are altruistic, where you are serving folks and you are being kind to others already as part of your work, healthcare would be one of those. That doesn't count. It helps with resilience in a different way. But for what we're talking about here, it really has to be something that's kind of outside what you would normally do, that random act of kindness. And this could be anything, you guys, giving someone a compliment, helping someone carry packages. It does not have to take a lot of time or effort. In the same way that random acts of kindness interrupt this cortisol cycle, so does reconnecting with people. And luckily for us, especially since we've gotten a crash course on how to do this virtually over the last year, especially those of us who are older and weren't necessarily counting on social media for that connection, that does count. So even texting someone, any kind of a brief, FaceTime, any sort of connection with someone is going to stop that cortisol cycle. Now, a face-to-face connection with someone, maybe someone who you work with, maybe someone in your family, that's going to have the biggest effect. But it doesn't have to be face-to-face for you to utilize this tool and have an impact on your stress level. And then finally, mindfulness. And this is one of my favorite things to talk about. I can come back and do a whole hour on just mindfulness. There used to be a lot of hesitation around mindfulness and meditation. There was a sense that was reserved for a certain religious group or a certain type of person. Or there were folks who were hesitant to try it because they felt like there's no way I'm going to be able to empty my mind. But so much more is known now about what mindfulness means. And it really is just being present in that moment without any kind of judgment. And so much more is known about ways to achieve that mindfulness. And so many more very, very tiny, brief tips are out there on how to do that in, say, 60 seconds. That this is a tool that I feel like should be much more widespread, more highly utilized, because it is so effective. And now we're knowing that you can do very, very simple things. I'm going to share with you your second set of tips in addition to this list around mindfulness. And the first one is a really quick way to do a mindfulness exercise in literally 30 to 60 seconds is to stop and note what you see, hear, smell, taste, and feel. And if you just take a few minutes to think about that without any kind of judgment, just here's what I see, hear, taste, smell, and feel for 60 seconds, you will have had a mindfulness moment. You're thinking only of the present moment, and that resets your brain. It stops that cortisol cycle. There are other ways you can do this. There's something called describe the room, where you imagine having to tell someone who's never been in the place you've been in currently what it looks like. That in itself, imagining what you would say, is a mindfulness exercise. And one of my absolute favorites is simply deep breathing for 1 minute. And your goal is to take 6 breaths in that 1 minute. And so if you do the math on that, that's 10 seconds per breath, which is much, much longer than most of us usually take to take a breath. So you have to concentrate, you have to count and make sure that you're taking 1 breath in and out over 10 seconds. When you do that for simply 60 seconds, 6 breaths, it actually lowers your cortisol for 3 hours. So 1 minute gets you 3 hours of a lower cortisol. So try any of these tips. Move around, stretch your muscles, find someone funny, listen to your favorite music, reconnect with people, be kind, or maybe just connect with the current moment. There's one more tip I want to share with you. And this one I usually take much more time with And usually I do on a one-on-one basis with folks, but I'm just going to briefly share it with you. And it has to do with in a moment of acute stress, okay, in a chronic stress setting, one of the ways you can regain some control over how you may feel around an event is to physically list on a piece of paper, what elements of what's going on in that situation do you just simply have to accept? There's nothing you can do about them. They're out of your control. You have to accept them. What elements about those circumstances can you influence? Maybe you don't have full control, but maybe you can tweak them a little bit. You can make suggestions. You can get something to move in a direction you want it to move. And then finally, what elements of that situation can you fully control? There's always your attitude in the control sphere. This can be a tough one though, and I'm a realist. And so sometimes we can shift our framework to feel more positive about a set of circumstances. But the reality is sometimes that's not enough. And you actually need to control what's happening around you to get it to fit your coping strategies, your resilience, and the lifestyle you're shooting for. And when there aren't elements of control, I work with people to find out what they are, or what you can do differently to get yourself in a situation where you do have a little bit of control. So you can see how this is kind of a heavy one. Changing your perspective is not as easy as just saying, okay, well, I'll look on the bright side. But I just introduce it so that those of you who are interested in pursuing this can reach out to me and we can talk more about what it really means to examine your sphere of influence. All right, there are actually even a few foods you can eat that will help you remain calm or help you to become calm. And in some cases, like I said, even interrupt that cortisol dump. Not a whole lot of us have salmon hanging around, so it's not a great one for in the moment stressor, let's say at work or at school, but it does contain omega-3s and they decrease cholesterol. So maybe it's a great meal for dinner after a stressful day. Spinach, maybe you have a little spinach in your lunchtime meal. This has magnesium, which also decreases cortisol. And oatmeal might be a great option for breakfast because it releases serotonin. Remember, that's the happy hormone that's also released during stretching and massage. This is the one most people will reach for, and that's okay as long as it's in moderation. And we've known forever, right, that chocolate makes us feel better. It actually causes the release of endorphins, which are the hormones that make us feel good. I recommend choosing dark chocolate because there are also antioxidants in dark chocolate that can be actually healthy and good for you. But of course, we want to use chocolate as a coping mechanism in extreme moderation, right? Chamomile tea is fantastic. It has a mild sedative in it. So this can calm you, but especially if you're having sleep issues, this is a wonderful nighttime, it can be part of your nighttime regimen to help get you kind of calm down before sleep, because high cortisol levels right before bedtime mean really poor sleep habits. So I've shared with you a couple tips for what to do right in the moment to kind of interrupt that stress cycle. But ultimately, as a family physician, what I focus on with everything is prevention. I would much rather prevent a stress response or chronic stress or diabetes or high blood pressure or stroke or any of those things than I would much rather do that than I enjoy treating that kind of thing. And that, my friends, is called resilience. Resilience is the cure to burnout and to chronic stress. So as I mentioned before, with our genetics, I'm going to back up for just a second. With our genetic makeup, some of us may be predisposed to be more resilient. Some of us may be predisposed to be less resilient. Wherever you are on that spectrum when you're born, it can change. Okay, folks can lose resilience, especially when they are under chronic stress and have been for a while. But you certainly can build resilience as well. And that's what I love to do with folks, is to help you to build resilience. Now, there are two major bodies of research. Let me just check my time, make sure we're good. There are two major bodies of research that focus on discovering how human beings build resilience, right? How do we go from being someone who feels pretty awful all the time because of chronic stress to someone who can rebound and maybe even grow from chronic stress. And the first body of research I'm going to share with you, and we're going to try to do, I hope you're all going to do this with me, even though I can't see you. We're going to do my favorite exercise. This is the one I start with everyone when I am helping them to identify the best way to build resilience. But before we talk about it, I want to tell you a little bit about the research behind it. So what this body of research, and it's about 22, 23 years old, has shown is that folks who are able to tend to 8 identifiable wellness dimensions are highly, highly resilient people. And if you're wanting to keep me honest, you should be thinking to yourself, all right, well, Dr. Brown, how do we know these people are more resilient? How do we know that actually works? And it's pretty fascinating. There's really 3 sort of bodies of studies that have been done. And the first one is they look at folks who tend to their wellness dimension and use the tool that I'm about to show you, and compare them to folks who don't use that tool. And then they look to see what is life like for them, and how do they report their life being. And so it turns out that more resilient people, the people who use these tools, have a higher level of education. They move up higher in their careers and make more money. They have lower rates of divorce. They have lower rates of chronic disease like diabetes, stroke, hypertension, cancer. They have a better sense of well-being, and have lower rates of depression and anxiety. And they report feeling successful and joy and satisfaction in their lives. Okay. So that's the ultimate outcome. And I love that. That's what we're shooting for. We want people to feel better and to be healthier. And so these resilience tools will accomplish that. But as a medical professional, a scientist, I need to see a little bit harder data. And so some of the other studies actually look at that physiologic response that we've been talking about. What's going on in the body when someone who's resilient and uses these tools is exposed to a stressor versus someone who is not. And what they have found is that more resilient folks have lower heart rates, they have lower blood pressures, they have lower breathing rates when they're exposed to stressors. They also draw blood and look for those stress hormones, cortisol, epinephrine, growth hormone, and all of those hormones are lower in those folks. And so these people are actually responding in a better adaptive way to stress physiologically than folks who do not use resilience tools. Well, that sold me. And so I dug a little bit deeper. But what's really, really, really interesting, and I tend to kind of geek out on this one a little bit because I'm really interested in the neurophysiology of resilience. But then they started doing more sophisticated testing using PET scans and what's called neuromapping, and looking at the brains of people who use resilience tools and who are more resilient. And what they found when they're exposed to a stressor compared to folks who don't use the tools is that they have a completely different neural pathway that sends that very dampened stress response. Okay, so the better adapted stress response. And so what that means in lay terms is that these folks using resilience tools have literally re-hardwired their brains to respond to stress in a better way, which is phenomenal. This is remarkable. Re-hardwired their brains so that cortisol cycle and the other stress hormone cycles are not as strong. They feel better physiologically, or they respond better physiologically, and they feel better in terms of health status, in terms of mental well-being, and they achieve more. And that's all from that rehardwiring of the brain. It's really kind of remarkable when you think about it. So hopefully you're as excited about me and you're like, whoa, I'm on board. Clearly this works. Teach me the tool. Let's talk about it. So what I do with everybody when I start, whether this is in groups, work units, organizations, individuals, is I show them the wellness dimensions, right? So we talked about how folks who tend to wellness dimensions tend to be more resilient. And that data is very strong and has been around, like I said, for about 2 decades, a little bit more than that. So what I would like you all to do right now, and I know that I can't prove it, I can't watch you to make sure you're doing this, but if you just bear with me, this exercise could be really, really impactful for all of you. But it's important that you write it down. instead of just think about it, think along with me as I'm talking about it. There's also some really neato studies that have shown that folks who write, and that could be including journaling, but certainly resilience programs like this, there's a connection between writing and the limbic system of our brain, which is our emotional processing center of our brain. And so we know that doing these resilience exercises along with physical writing can be impactful. So I'd love for you guys to do this with me and actually pull out a piece of paper and a pen and write this down. I would like you to write each of these 8 wellness domains, and we're going to talk about them in just a second, and then simply put a check by the dimensions that you feel like you're tending to. Now, let me explain what tending to means, because I work a lot with healthcare professionals and they tend to be type A personalities. And to them, tending to means perfection, right? I've got to be at the gym for an hour and a half every day, and I only eat salmon, and I sleep, 9 hours a night, and so on and so forth. That's not what I'm talking about. So any of my perfectionists out there, please understand tending to means you're trying, okay? You're doing something to try to make sure that that aspect of your life is being tended to. Sure, could you grow in that area? Yeah. But if you're doing something, please give yourself a check, okay? So let's start with emotional wellness. That's kind of what we're talking about today, right? How do we manage stress? How do we cope? How do we have good relationships? Put a check in your box if you're doing something, for instance, attending this webinar, something to tend to your emotional well-being, right? Financial well-being is the one that I kid that is the one I can help you with the least. But what I can tell you is this is not about having billions and billions of dollars. This is about feeling secure. Yes. Do you feel like your financial situation is secure? But are you also saving and spending according to the patterns that feel comfortable to you? Or if you're in a relationship and the spending and saving patterns are a co-dependent kind of thing, are they the patterns that are comfortable for the both of you? Okay, so put a check, whatever that feels like to you. Do you have a savings account? Are you trying to watch your bill, your luxury spends, whatever it is that makes you feel like you're tending to that, put a check there if you're doing that. Now, social wellness was one that I had to spend a lot of time on before COVID, convincing folks, no, this is important. I think everybody gets it now, so I don't have to spend a lot of time on this one. Being connected with people is hugely important to our overall well-being and our resilience. And so I'd like you to check this box if you know you have a support group, you've got friends or family or a church group or a hobby group, something that, a group of folks, could be one person, could be 20 people that you're supported by, but you can't put a check in the box if you haven't connected with them, okay? So if it's your best friend from college, from USC, and they'd do anything for you, but you haven't talked to them in 3 months, you can't put a check in that box, right? So we have those people, but we also have to be connecting with them. Spiritual wellness. We're going to pause here and emphasize that this is actually, as it turns out, according to the literature, the most important wellness dimension, period. In fact, they found that folks who have 7 checks in all of the other wellness dimensions, but not in the spiritual wellness dimension, do not reach that same level of resilience and joy and satisfaction in their lives. Now, spiritual wellness can be faith-based. It is for many, but it doesn't have to be. Spiritual wellness is knowing what your meaning and your purpose is and living it. Okay. So if I am supposed to be working with children, I'm supposed to be teaching them, but you're not able to do that, you don't have spiritual wellness. Okay. Or maybe you're working and teaching with children, but that's not really your purpose. That's not really your passion or what you're best at or what you were put on this earth to do. That's not spiritual wellness. So you can see why this one is very, very important. It's kind of the framework for our overall well-being. Are you living your purpose in life? Do you even know what it is? I work with a lot of folks who are like, I'm actually not even sure what my purpose is. All right, the next one is occupational, okay? And this is, do you feel valued at work? And also, are you moving up or down the ladder or staying on the same rung, wherever it is you want to be? Some of us are trying to phase out of work. Maybe we're retirement age. Others of us are trying to climb that ladder. Others really want to stay where they are on that ladder. Where are you in that paradigm? And is it comfortable for you? And do you feel valued at your workplace? Now, physical wellness is what everybody thinks I do at the hospital. When they hear that I do wellness, that I, just run around and flog you with asparagus and say, you must work out 150 minutes a week. And sure, I do a little bit of that. But there's so much more to the wellness work that we do. Physical wellness is the one that people think about, and it's certainly incredibly important. So are you trying to be physically active? Are you trying to balance what you eat? Are you getting enough sleep? Are you getting your health maintenance checkups? All of those things. Are you making sure your workstation is ergonomically stable? All of those things that tend to your physical wellness are very important. Intellectual wellness. This is hobbies, guys. Okay. So you may be in a situation, maybe you're still in a learning situation, in an education session or setting, maybe in your career, maybe otherwise CMEs, those kinds of things. You're learning. That's fine. But what we're talking about here is what is outside your normal duties, typically in your career. Okay, what's outside your normal duties that you do that's just for you, where you're able to be creative, find flow, enjoyment, and it's just for fun. And I will tell you that when I'm talking, say, for instance, to residents and doctors at the hospital, that's one of the first things to go. And many of them can't even remember what it was that used to be their hobbies or that, used to get them excited and feeling creative. And so we have to dig down and figure out how to do that, how to get them back into that. And then finally, environmental is exactly what it sounds like. Are your surroundings contributing to chaos or calm? Right at the beginning of COVID, we had started a renovation of an entire floor of my house at the same time that we all became quarantined. That didn't help my well-being at all. It was chaotic. My environment wasn't soothing to me. And so people underestimate that, their workspace, their study space, their relaxation space, their car, all of that contributes to well-being. So because I can't see the chat box, I'm going to stop sharing for just a minute, although I do have a couple more slides I want to go back to. I gotta love the meme. It had to have been about the stress ball. That must be the one you're referring to. But I'm looking at the chat box, and I would love for you guys, if you feel comfortable, if anyone out there got 8 checks, if you could just type an 8 in the chat box. Okay, so you feel like you're doing something, you're tending to every wellness dimension. And I'm looking, I don't see anything. And I'm not surprised. Even before COVID, in a group of, say, 100, maybe somewhere around 5%, 8%, people might, it's really actually 2 to 5%, people might have said, yes, I got an 8. Okay. It's very, very difficult to achieve an 8 in wellness dimensions. Does anybody have a 6 or a 7? I got a 6, another 6. Okay, a 7, another 6, another 6. Good. Great. So 6 seems to be pretty popular. Shout out to the 7 we've got out there. Okay, that's pretty darn good, you guys. That means that you are really maximizing your resilience, and you're going to be more resilient than someone who doesn't have as many wellness dimensions checked. It also means, and this is why I love this tool, that you have a roadmap now. Yep. Oh no, my 7's missing spiritual. Okay, we're gonna talk about that. Okay. Thank you for being honest about that. But what this means for you is that you now have a roadmap. You know exactly where you need to go to try to move yourself into a better state of well-being. You have 1 or 2 wellness dimensions that you're not able to check. So we know right off the bat, okay, great. We can put everything else over here. You got that tucked away for now. Let's pick a baby step activity or sentiment or something in each of these 1 or 2 wellness dimensions to get you that check, to do the best we can to get you that check, right? So for instance, for my participant who has the missing, spiritual wellness, if I were working with this person individually, the first thing we would talk about is, do you know your purpose? And if the answer to that is no, there's a series of exercises and conversation starters and that sort of thing that can get us to that place and start the work of identifying what that person's purpose is. Now you can put a check in that box because you're tending to it. You're trying to figure it out, right? Maybe it's a half a check, right? Because you're not living it yet, but you're working on it, and that moves you forward in this resilience work, right? So it just has to be a baby step to get you moving forward in the resilience work. And then ultimately, if I have someone who says, well, yeah, I know exactly what my purpose is, but I'm not living it. Now we start thinking about, well, how do we craft your job or your personal life so that you can start living it? And again, we start very, very small. So that's my biggest piece of advice for you around this one is, if you've identified which wellness dimensions don't have a check in them, and you're ready to start tending to that, pick something very, very small. Resilience work is about success. It's not about necessarily challenging yourself and seeing if you can get to your outcome. We want you to succeed. So we want to start with a goal that we know is achievable, and then we grow from there. Now, what happens, the sort of flip side of this coin that I want to prepare everybody for, is that let's say my 6s and my 7s do something, they find a baby step so that they can begin to check those boxes. Two things can happen. We check back in 3 months, we see how you're doing. Let's say you've done great. You feel like, yes, I can check the, I've made grounds in my spiritual wellness dimension or wherever else. We can either say, all right, great. Which ones can we now start to optimize? Because we can always grow, right? We can always do more in a particular wellness dimension. And we begin to identify, which ones were really strong and maybe which ones just had a baby check in them. We could check it, but it was just a baby check. Now what can we do to grow in that area? So there's always more that we can do, but more often what happens is someone will come back to me and say, yes, I got to check in my spiritual wellness box, and I got to check in my, financial wellness box. So I was going for 8, but while I was doing that, I kind of dropped off in my intellectual wellness box, right? Because that's what happens, guys. Juggling 8 balls is incredibly hard to do. And that's okay, because now we go, all right, well, let's start to tend to your intellectual wellness. And so it's an iterative process. It's a constant process. It's not one that's meant to be frustrating, like, crap, I can never get to 8 wellness dimensions. It's one to just keep things dynamic and to always keep you understanding what your next step is, right? Because so many people will come to me and say, I want to feel better. I don't even know where to start. Well, here's your roadmap. We use the wellness dimensions to determine this for us. And as I mentioned earlier, and you've probably figured out by now, this is a tool we don't just use once. We revisit this every quarter. How are you doing? How are you doing? How are you doing? What can we improve? What do we need to just leave alone? What fell off? What did we lose on the wayside? But it's a phenomenal tool, and it's so easy, and it's very concrete. People like the idea of leaving after using this tool and sort of knowing what the next step might be. And if you don't know what the next step might be, this is where I love to help. And so you can reach out to me. I'll show you how to do that in just a second. I'm not going to make you tell me, but for those folks who are under 3 checks, okay, these are the folks that I love to work with quickly, okay, and the most, because these folks are really, really struggling. So for instance, if you are the leader of a team, or maybe you're the wellness champion of a team, and you want to use this tool with a group of folks, understand that people who end up with less than 3 checks, so 2, 1, or 0, are really in a bad place and will need support, okay, whether that's from someone like me to try to walk them through and first of all, find out where they're being too hard on themselves and maybe they deserve more checks, or find those baby steps in different wellness dimensions to kind of get them a little bit further up the resilience scale. But those of you, and I hope there are none, I hope none of you are in the 0, 1, or 2 range. But if you are, understand you need some support. Okay. And that can come from me, that can come from your support network, that can come from an EAP program. But I encourage you to find some support, because I'm guessing you're feeling a lot of struggle and a lot of pain. I'm going to share my screen again and show you the last couple of slides that I have, and then I would love to take some more questions. So that's the other big tool that I wanted to share with you. If you remember, I said that there are actually two really big bodies of research around how people understanding how human beings build resilience. And the first one is tending to wellness dimensions. The second one is around maximizing positive emotions. And so I do a whole series of talks and workshops on maximizing positive emotions, why it works, what happens in your body physiologically when you experience a positive emotion, how to increase your positive emotions. I will tell you again, I am a realist. My husband can tell you I've never been a silver lining kind of gal. So I do not teach people how to fake positive emotions. We teach you how to find the ones you are experiencing, despite the fact that you may not think you are. Find them, harness them, and stockpile them. And that's how you build resilience. And so I've just listed here on the screen a few of the scores of tools that we teach people that can help drive that process of finding, harnessing, and stockpiling positive emotions. So feeling awe. There's the dreaded physical activity again. It really, really does help to boost your resilience. This is mindfulness, random acts of kindness, gratitude, and 3 good things, which is an exercise where you write down 3 good things each night. They're all very simple because I too lead an incredibly busy life. And while I do know that meditation and mindfulness for an hour a day is fantastic, that ain't happening in my life. So I'm not going to be able to teach that to you if I can't do it myself. So I teach research-based, evidence-based, bite-sized tools like these and many others that help you to spike those positive emotions and therefore cause those same resilience indicators that I mentioned before, the success outcomes, the physiologic changes, and the rewiring of the brain. I wanted to mention very briefly for those of you out there who may be a part of a work unit and specifically a leader of a work unit, because working with individuals on building their resilience is really important to me. But even more exciting for me is working with work units and their leaders, because often individuals can do what they can with their, to build their resilience. But if they're in an environment, a work environment, let's say, that is contributing to that stressor, right? So I'm thinking a lot, about our healthcare workers, but certainly many, many other areas would have this as a factor. It's going to have to be a culture within a team to address that well-being, right? Not just even the sort of implicit and explicit permission that we share with each other to tend to our well-being, but how do you build well-being into policies, efficiencies, flow, workflow, all of that. It's not just about making sure people are eating well and resting when they need to. It's about, is your work unit set up to support a culture of well-being? And that, my friends, is a whole other set of talks. But I did want to just dip into it for a second in case we do have some work unit leaders out there. And by the way, there's a 3rd tier, which is organizational wellness, which is that culture of wellness within an entire organization. And so if any of you are leaders of organizations, this is also impactful. But I just want you to glance at what resilience drivers are out there that basically eliminate burnout. So if your workers have that meaning, doesn't that resonate with spiritual wellness, right? Have a little bit of autonomy, rest time, they're not overloaded. That tends to be the par for the course these days in the US. People are doing what they do best and only what they do best, having the resources to do that, having your leadership engaged, and having psychological safety to share this kind of conversation. This drives resilience in the workplace, and you will see work units and workplaces that have these drivers checked have virtually no burnout within their organizations. So I just want to throw in one more tool for work units and for leaders in case you want to maybe take this up a step and move from individual resilience building to work unit resilience building. This is just one very, very simple one. We have many, many more that we can share. And we call this the Hassles Project. And essentially, dumbing it down, you give your team the opportunity to submit hassles. Now, the most important first step is clarifying for your team what a hassle is versus a real problem. So a hassle is not, I'm not paid enough. That's a big, big deal. A hassle is, why do we have the center light switch over here on the right? That's the kind of thing we're talking about. My favorite story is about a radiology department with Prisma. And one of the team members submitted the hassle that when he is having to push a patient in a stretcher to get their x-ray done, he has to run to the door, to the double doors, hit the button that will open the double doors, run back to the end of the stretcher, and then try to get the stretcher through before the double doors close. Is this a huge deal? Is this, we're not talking about salary PTO issues or understaffing. This is a minor hassle. That's a perfect example of a hassle. You can even ask those team members to submit solutions, which is even better. In this case, the team member said, hey, is there any way we can move the button that opens the door a stretcher's length away from the door so that I am at the head of the stretcher? I can hit the button, I can go through, my patient doesn't have to race through the doors, doesn't get hit by them, doesn't get joggled around when they're already in pain. So the leader was able to contact facilities, they moved the button, hassle solved, great, everyone feels a little bit better. Does he feel better because he doesn't have to run back and forth to the door and the head of the stretcher? Yeah, a little bit. But what he really feels better about was he was heard. And one of those paper cuts in his day was eliminated. If you've never heard the expression death by 1,000 paper cuts, that's often what happens in burnout. It's not the job itself. For instance, as a physician, I absolutely love taking care of patients, but it's all the little things outside of my job that just drive me nuts, all those paper cuts that will eventually lead me to burnout. So when you fix hassles, you are fixing some of those paper cuts, but you're also sending a very strong culture of well-being message that we are listening to you and we want to help you with these problems. And even when a hassle isn't solved, for instance, there's some reason, I'm so sorry, we can't run a line, the electric line to that area, this is why that's done, or whatever the reason is why a problem can't be solved, people still find value in being heard and acknowledged. Oh yes, I bet that is kind of a pain. So take this on if you're a leader or a member of a work group that might want to use this to help morale. It's a great, very simple tool, as long as everyone's on board with what a hassle is, for starting this idea of having a culture of wellness within your department. This is how you can reach out to me. Please don't forget the 2 after my name. If you email just rachel.brown@prismahealth.org, you'll get a pulmonologist who will ignore you, but I will not. I will respond as soon as I absolutely can. I would love to talk with any of you around how to maximize your wellness dimensions. What are some other strategies for incorporating wellness into a work unit culture or even an organization culture? I really appreciate Haven having me today. We've got a couple of minutes left for questions if anyone has any. I'm going to look in the chat box.
Rachel, I'm not sure if you can see the Q&A as well. There's one there, but if I can read it to you.
Yeah, I got it. What if your job is all encompassing, only have a 3? Okay. And you realize that you're in full blown chronic stress after reviewing your slide. What do you concentrate on first? Great. How do you explain it to your supervisor? This is such a great question. And there's not an easy answer, as you can imagine. What I do with folks who have low numbers of wellness dimensions checked, we take a look at the remaining wellness dimensions, and I find out from you through an interview and a series of questions, what will mean the most to you. Now, if your spiritual wellness dimension isn't checked, that's going to be the one that I'm going to try to push to focus on first. But that may not be what you want to focus on first. And what's going to help the most is what means the most to you. So I would recommend taking a look at the other 5 dimensions, imagining which one might have, you're not going to know, but just imagining which one might have the biggest impact in helping you feel better. If spiritual wellness isn't checked, I encourage you to think about that one. And then begin to think about a baby step that you could do in that dimension that might make you feel like you're making some progress. If you don't know where to start, what that baby step could look like, that's when I'd love for you to email me and we can talk through it and talk about what that might look like. The other half of your question is around what's outside of your control and who else, that sphere of influence slide we talked about, and who else is sort of dictating how your wellness journey goes. And for many, many people, that is going to be a job situation, right? Sometimes it's a personal situation, it's a relationship or whatever, but in your case, it sounds like a job situation. And what the easiest answer I can give you in just a few seconds is that we can help you craft connecting the dots between your well-being and what your supervisor would like to see, right? Their ultimate outcome is productivity, satisfaction, whatever they're looking for in out of your work. And we can help you craft the messaging it takes to get supervisors, managers, directors, others to understand that in order for that to occur, for them to get that outcome from you, this needs to occur. I need X, Y, and Z. And so, the first part of that is figuring out what X, Y, and Z is. And then the second part is us helping you to be able to message that in a way that sometimes can be difficult. I actually have found more often than not, supervisors tend to be very open to it, but also tend to shift a little bit on their own perspective of wellness and their work unit's perspective of wellness. And so we've seen one person like yourself kind of start this, and then suddenly we've got a department that's very interested in tending, a leader of a department intending to everyone else's wellness as well. Like, oh, wow, I didn't think about this, but this would be great for my whole unit. So I encourage you not to be fearful. Well, there's nothing I can do to keep you from being fearful. It's difficult when we have to ask for change or ask for something in our jobs, but I encourage you to be brave. Let me help you if you want me to, but ask for what you need once you've discovered what it is that you think you need. Well, thank you all very, very much. Please feel free to reach out to me, rachel.brown2@prismahealth.org. I'd love to talk with all of you. I hope everyone is doing well. My last parting sentiment will be that I went to an arts event last night. It was outside, it was socially distanced, but it was an opportunity for folks who love the performing arts to finally get to see some performing arts, since we haven't gotten to see a whole lot of that in the last year. And I got to tell you, the energy that I felt in that group that was there, you could just tell we all miss the arts as an outlet. I think, performing visual arts are all keep us in balance with the other things that are going on in our world, and having that, not be a big part of our lives in the last year, I think has contributed to our lack of well-being. So if you can do any of that today or this week or this weekend, find something to listen to or watch and engage in that, emotional and kind of spiritual journey that the art takes us on. It'll be wonderful for your soul. And thank you all so much. Thank you, Haven.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brown. So many great tools to utilize. Just a reminder to everyone, this recording will go out in an email within the next day or two as well. So if there's anything you want to revisit, any of those tools, you will get a recording of this with the survey email as well. But thank you again, Dr. Brown. Really appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Bye, everyone. Be well.